Hi, this is Chad Pytel, the CEO of thoughtbot, and I'm here today talking with Mike Burns, one of the developers at thoughtbot, about how he uses open source software in his everyday work. Mike, thanks for talking with me.
Sure, thanks for inviting.
So tell me a little bit about sort of the high level, why you do what you do.
So I use a full open source stack, Linux, GNOME, and Ruby, of course. And a lot of that comes from, I am a developer, and I like looking at source code. That's really a thing I enjoy doing. I like reading source code. And I like knowing that if I ever want to, I can look at the source code of my entire operating system. So that's kind of the really high level. And then there are some other kind of paranoia, bizarre things that go into it too. Like, I know what's exactly going on when I am running some code, or when I'm typing some file that's a super top secret file. I know what's going into that.
Right. When did you start using Linux or whatever other open source operating system you use?
Yeah, so it started when I was 16. I installed Linux, as teenagers tend to do.
What was your distro that you installed?
I think it was like a really old version of Slackware. I tried a bunch. I tried like an ancient Red Hat, before Red Hat even had RPMs, an ancient Debian, an ancient Slackware. And I went with Slackware for a bit.
Right.
And I used that at work, and at home I had this FreeBSD machine that I just had running. I used that as a mail server and a web server, and I played with setting up a server on that. And after a bunch of years, I realized that I had been using this FreeBSD server mostly without problem at all, upgrading it every 6 months. And then I've been changing these Linux distros back and forth and had a lot of complaints. And so I went totally FreeBSD for a very long time. And it wasn't until very recently that I switched off when Linux got better laptop support than FreeBSD. So it can do suspend and hibernate, and also it supports better video drivers. And so that's why I'm back on Linux on my laptops now, but I'm still doing FreeBSD on all my servers and my spare time. It's a really good model, I feel.
Now, when you started at thoughtbot, you did try OS X Mac for a while, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I had a MacBook for I think 2 months here, and I ran into, it's a lot of what I'm used to. I'm used to like the Linux FreeBSD kind of style, where Make comes with the system, where GCC comes with the system, and I found it really jarring that it wasn't, I was not the primary target audience of OS X. And this was over 4 years ago now, so there was no homebrew. There was MacPorts, which really wasn't that great. Right. And I just ran into a lot of setup issue, and I felt like, okay, sure, I can plug my monitor in and make that work, but now I have to, my actual job is harder.
Right, and it seemed like certain things, if I remember right, and this was a while ago.
Yeah.
Almost about 4 years. Things like that you were used to, like focus follows, mouse, and those kinds of things, you could get those to work, but they didn't work the way you actually wanted, and then there was no way to tweak them.
That's right. Yeah, there was a lack of, it's not so much a lack of configurability, but a lack of being able to change everything underneath. And yeah, so like I ran into focus follows mouse problems. I was, there's a lot of convenient things that have grown up that are really obscure, like pasting on middle click and focus follows mouse. And those, I was really used to those things. And I felt like OS X wanted me to use the mouse in totally different ways, in many more ways than I was used to. Like I barely use the mouse now. And I felt like OS X was pushing me more towards overall I felt like I was not the target audience for it, and it just made sense not to use it.
So now you run Linux on your laptop, and tell us a little bit about your Linux install.
Sure. So this is Debian, Debian testing. So it's the almost the latest version of all the software available, and there's really nothing too special going on. I use apt, which is the installation, the package manager for Debian. I tell it to install Ruby. Ruby's in there. Postgres came installed already, so that was convenient. And yeah, so this is Debian testing, which means it has GNOME 3, the latest version of GNOME. And there are some really interesting, they've opened a lot of that. Previously, you had to know Python or C to write GNOME apps, and now a lot of it is in JavaScript. And that's really fun and interesting. I'll show some more of that later, too.
Okay. Go right ahead.
Okay, so, well, first I'm going to show, since I'm a Ruby dev, sometimes I dive into the Ruby source code. And so it's actually pretty straightforward on Debian to get the source code. I'm recording my screen, so everything's a little slower.
Okay.
So in Debian, you can get the source code for anything by just asking for it. So I'm going to get the source code for Ruby 191, if I spelled it correctly. Yes. And so you can see it's downloading the Debian extensions to it, and then it's downloading the actual Ruby source code itself as a tarball. And it just so happens I've already downloaded it, so I'll just jump in and look at it. So I look at the Ruby source code maybe once every 2 or 3 months. A lot of the times it's driven by a curiosity of like, how is that being implemented? Is there a bug in Ruby? There never is. It's always in my code, and it always leads to discovery about what's going on in the Ruby internals. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, once I was pushing stuff into a hash, and I was trying to figure out how various things were being hashed, like the actual hashing algorithm. And so I looked into array.c, for example. And so just a quick tour. So let's set my tab stop to 8, because we're in C now. So at the bottom is where they export the actual Ruby methods. So here we're looking at how the method called hash is exported. And what this is reading as is we define a method on the array called hash, and it's defined by this C function. And so we can jump to that. And so the implementation is fairly small, which means it's hard to understand. So it recursively creates a hash. It recursively calls the hash function on its children. And there's a flag of whether there's some interesting stuff going on here. Stuff I wouldn't know by just reading the documentation. So there's a flag of whether you should do it recursively or iteratively. That's this recur flag here. And then you can see more of what's going on underneath, how it's calling RB hash to recursively call, recursively build hashing algorithms, and then at the end it turns it all into a fixed num. Mm-hmm. And so I think I was looking at this because I needed to implement a composite data structure that had to have a hashing algorithm defined on it. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to see how is Ruby doing it. And so I find this educational, fascinating even.
Right. Right, and so this example is using Ruby, and people watching might say, well, Ruby's open source, I use Ruby, I can look at this now on Windows. Right. But this is an example of, if you're curious about how your window manager or, how your Finder works, mm-hmm. you can go in and look at the code for that as well. Exactly. So this is just one small example. And so you mentioned the Finder, so let me load up so GNOME 3 comes with a shell that you can use to interact with it, very much like the web inspector. So we're going to inspect some elements. So over here, there is this Bluetooth guy. So I'm going to inspect that. So now it's come back and said, you've inspected this, and now this guy is, you can see it's highlighted in red in the corner, is the little Bluetooth icon. So it just so happens I never used Bluetooth.
and we can refer to it now. So we have this variable, and so I can just hide that. This is some JavaScript that's exposed, and by doing that, I've hidden it. I can show it again too. So that's a quick script. It's just using that reval print loop.
Right.
We can go a little further, and so all of this interaction is scripted using JavaScript, and so we can. I'm going to dive into all these plugins I have now that other people have written. Hold on. Local, share, show. Extensions. So there are a bunch of extensions that other people have written, and you can see I've actually written one of them. And they're fairly simple.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I wrote mine, in fact, was I tried the...
So there's an extension JS and a metadata JSON.
That's right. And so the metadata is just basically the name of the extension.
Okay.
There's nothing too exciting going on there.
Yeah.
And the extension JS is very short and simple. So this extension is one that I've written that takes the this little menu with my name in it,
Yep.
And some other notification stuff. It used to be on the top right corner. I moved it all the way to the left. So, and this is the extension that does it. So I grab the user menu. There are these objects called actors. So I grab the actor part of it.
Right. And this is JavaScript.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So this is just JavaScript. Nothing too exciting. I already know it. It's convenient.
Now it's JavaScript, but it doesn't use CSS for styling and those kinds of things, does it?
This does use, there is CSS being used for these styles,
Okay.
yeah. It's not the, it uses the same selector syntax, but
Right.
obviously there's a lot of custom
Right. So
extensions.
implementation-wise, it's not like your OS is rendering in WebKit or something like that.
That's right, that's right. It's a custom, yeah.
Okay.
But they brought, and this is sort of a thing with the open source community of, it's not just that they did not need to make this JavaScript.
Right.
But they wanted more people to build stuff.
Right.
And so because of that, they wanted to reach out and do JavaScript and CSS and stuff that web developers know.
Right. So you wrote this extension in JavaScript to move your name from over on the right to over on the left. Is that the only way to accomplish that?
You can write it in other languages.
Right. So
yeah.
So is it the expectation of GNOME now that this is how people will do it? And are they removing preferences or those kinds of things in favor of this?
So it's a mix.
Mm-hmm.
So GNOME has always had the philosophy, or since GNOME 2, they've had the philosophy of not having configuration,
Okay.
of just the default should be good. So they've removed a lot of configurability and in exchange added a really strong scripting interface. So they've actually introduced a whole bunch of extensions, and they've set up an entire framework for adding extensions and sharing extensions with other people.
Right.
And so this kind of, they're fostering an open source community
Right.
here. And so the way I actually wrote my extension is I looked at other extensions.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that comes back to what I did with Ruby, which is I opened up Ruby and I looked at what was going on, and then I copied some things from there.
Right. Now, this is interesting because I think this is really attractive to developers. I think it's why a lot of people run Linux who run Linux.
Right.
And I sort of had this theory when Linux started to get commercialized and things like Ubuntu started coming out that were more focused on being available for consumers, that would free up things like GNOME to focus on just making what made sense for the community, as opposed, because there was this period where they were clearly working very hard to make things work for consumers.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't know that it was very good.
I agree.
When you're not building software for yourself in open source, it becomes hard to build good stuff, I think.
No, I totally agree. And I feel like things like Ubuntu don't have me as their target audience too. They're catering to people like my mom who just have a web browser that they use. Right. Whereas, GNOME 3 and Debian and stuff are taking it back to sysadmins and developers. Mm-hmm. Especially sysadmins too, right? They need to know what's going on underneath.
Right. So tell me a little bit about your actual computer setup and your hardware. I think that's something that, so I used to run Linux, and it was all on desktop. It was long enough ago where people didn't really have laptops.
Right.
And I did run it on a laptop, but it wasn't the greatest experience. So what's your hardware like now, and how is the setup and all that stuff?
Sure, yeah. So I use a ThinkPad. I have a whole bunch of ThinkPads actually. Mm-hmm. And it's fairly straightforward out of the box. So it's just a standard ThinkPad. It's got a solid state drive. I just have to make sure to get the right network card. And this isn't so much because it won't work, but because I want to continue using open source drivers. Okay. And only the Intel cards, some of the Intel cards seem to support that. Okay. And similarly with the video card, definitely the Intel card is the way to go there. The ATI and the NVIDIA cards only work with proprietary drivers. Yeah. And so those are really, I remember the time you were talking about too. I had like a bunch of desktops running Linux, and I had to specially craft, what hard drive can I get? What motherboard can I get? And now it's gotten a lot simpler. Now it's down to, do I want to run open source drivers or not? And so there's still a little bit of that, right? Like I have to make a conscious decision, but it's not down to as many details as it used to be.
And because you're running a distribution that you're on the latest, I imagine you're probably not recompiling your kernel and those kinds of things on a frequent basis.
That's right. I never recompile my kernel. Okay. Debian just gives me modules for everything, so if I need to, I can load it in. But yeah, the days of rebuilding X, rebuilding a kernel, fighting the X configuration, those days are gone. It's really, we talked about that push for consumer Linux. That did help in that regard. They made it dumb and simple. Right. Right. Which is fine.
Tell me more about your keyboard, because I think that might be interesting to people.
That's fair. Yeah. Should I hold it up to a camera?
Yeah.
So it is the ThinkPad keyboard, which is definitely one of the best keyboards out there. It's got a nice clicky-clacky kind of noise. And this is the laptop keyboard basically taken out and made into a thing that has a USB cable on it.
Right. So it has, I don't even know what they're called, the nub or whatever.
Yeah, there are a lot of nicknames for it. But it does have this...
Right, so you don't use a mouse, you just use that.
That's right. So it's right in the home row. And like I mentioned before, my primary use of the mouse is to focus windows or to paste text. And so I don't have... I haven't gotten fine-grained control with this. I've never needed to, is why. Right. With a mouse, you can position it exactly where you need, but I just use it to focus on windows or it's really just focus on windows.
Right.
And then the other interesting thing about this keyboard is that, so as part of the mouse, there's a 3-button mouse instead of the normal 2 or 1. Right. And so that the middle button on most Unixes on X is a paste functionality, and I use that extensively. And also it opens links in new tabs.
Okay. Speaking of tabs, in terms of web browser, what is your web browser that you use? Yeah, so I'm not thrilled with it, but I use Chromium. Okay. And why aren't you thrilled with it?
First, Chromium is the open source version of Chrome. Yep. And I'm not thrilled with it because it's jarring against my GNOME desktop. Okay. So the GNOME web browser is called Epiphany.
Well, actually, let's take it one step back. You
Yeah.
said Chromium is the open source version of Chrome.
Mm-hmm.
Is Google maintaining that? Are they the main maintainers of Chromium?
Google is the main maintainer. Oh,
Okay.
I don't even have that installed.
He does. Yeah, you don't even have it installed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Google is right. So Google makes Chromium, and then they make Chrome out of that. And so they are, in a sense, the main maintainer. They are going to take all pull requests.
Okay. So in a lot of ways, it's like WebKit and Safari.
Yes.
With Apple, although I guess it's one level of abstraction beyond that because it's WebKit, then Chromium, then
Safari, right? And so I'm missing out on things like Adobe Flash, which iPhones are too.
Right.
And I believe there's some Windows specific code that they have in Chrome for improving the JavaScript engine. I don't know many details about that,
Right.
but I'm apparently missing it.
Okay. So can you bring up the browser and show us what it looks like?
So I'm gonna open the browser without using my keyboard shortcuts. So you throw the mouse in the top left corner, and this thing comes up. So on the right you have the workspaces, which I believe Apple calls spaces.
Right.
And then over here on the left side, you can drag these icons there as like a quick launch bar. I obviously don't make use of that.
Right.
And then these are apps I have installed. So if I want like a screenshot program, I can type screen. And these are things that deal with screenshots. You can see the screenshot program. And then I use Shutter sometimes too.
Okay.
And the screen settings as well.
Right.
But let's go back to the browser.
And you said you were going to open up the browser using not your screen.
Not my keyboard shortcuts.
Right. So what do you use for the keyboard shortcuts normally? Is it like a launcher kind of program?
Yeah. So GNOME comes with a keyboard shortcut settings.
Okay.
So I mapped Windows key B to launch the browser.
Right.
It's it just comes with it.
Yep.
So Chromium is the one we've been talking about. Epiphany is the GNOME default browser. And so let's launch that. And so you can see it's definitely different. Let me launch another program so we can compare. It's kind of the standard text editor, if you will, for GNOME, is gedit. And you can see,
it's different in subtle ways, right?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, actually, that was a complaint, if I remember right, a complaint about Chrome when it first came out for Mac.
Mm-hmm.
And they fixed a lot of that over time.
Right. And yeah, it's different in subtle ways, but also it was intentionally different. So they got rid of the menu bar.
Right, but they send that color down.
Yeah.
All the way.
Yeah, and you can probably drag that. No. Okay. I don't know.
Right.
And yeah, so let's look at like some search results, right? Like monkeys. So this scroll bar is actually a custom scroll bar that Google implemented, and they did that for a reason. So that if you search here for like zoo or something,
right, it shows that highlighting.
Yeah, exactly.
The same thing that the other OS versions of Chrome have.
Right.
So they had to do that as custom.
Right. And what this means is they had to implement the scroll bar specifically for Linux for whatever from scratch.
Right.
And for the very first time I tried Chrome, there's a really nice feature of scroll bars on GNOME that if you middle click on the scroll bar, it'll jump straight to there. And they implemented this now, but they had to do that, right? So it's all this like rediscovery and reinvention of stuff that I'm already used to.
But in terms of Web Inspector and all that stuff, it has all of that.
That's right. Yeah. So I really like, the thing I like about Chrome is everything inside the web browser. But the actual Chrome doesn't match.
Right. Yeah. And in terms of editor, you use Vim.
I use Vim.
like most of thoughtbot.
Hmm.
Do you use like a gvim kind of thing, or is it a terminal vim?
I do. I use gvim.
Okay.
I used to use terminal vim inside of screen, but I've switched to gvim just because the fonts are nicer.
Yeah.
Um,
And what other programs do you use in your day-to-day work?
I want to say that gvim and terminal are my two number one programs.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of terminal, you use the stock Debian terminal?
The GNOME terminal, yep.
Okay, the GNOME terminal. Okay.
Yep. I use GNOME terminal with Z shell and then my own custom scripts.
Mm-hmm. Are you using something like tmux or Screen on a day-to-day basis?
No, I'm not. I used to use Screen for years
Mm-hmm.
for my development, but I no longer do. I still have a Screen RC that is ready to go, but I found that just the only thing I do with my terminal now is I use it to run tests or write a bunch of shell scripts.
Right.
And
Does this terminal support tabs or anything like that, or
it does.
do you use them or not?
I will sometimes use 2 tabs.
Mm-hmm.
I very seldom go more than 5.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's my top. Because terminals are also easy to pop up too, assuming you're not recording your screen.
Right.
So sometimes I'll just open a bunch of terminals and type things into them and then close them as needed.
So I see some interesting things happening with the window layout when you're opening new windows. How is that? What's the logic there?
You tell me.
So this isn't a setting that you've done?
Sadly, no. So this is a bug that I've been following on GNOME, in fact, of so they're, like I said, they're striving for a lack of configuration with
Mm-hmm.
same defaults.
Right.
And there's still, there's no good default for laying out windows. Even
Right.
on OS 10, I
Well, and everyone
got frustrated.
has their own
Yeah,
preference.
that's right. And there is a tiling window manager that I could get,
Mm-hmm.
but I just that also is not what I want.
It seems like what's trying to happen here is some tiling,
Hmm.
but not.
So there is actually some tiling built in too. So
Mhm.
if I want this to take up the left half, I can drag it over here, and as soon as
Okay. Yeah.
and then it does that. So I can get somewhere.
Right. And in terms of how new windows are responding, they're clearly responding to touch each other.
Right.
Like that.
I believe the default is open in the middle of the screen, and then everything else goes left to bottom.
Okay. But it's not working like you would expect completely.
Not completely. There are some subtle bugs.
Yep.
They did a complete rewrite for GNOME 3.
So in terms of your overall workflow, you're pretty much using gvim,
Mhm.
terminal, Chromium.
that's
Anything else?
that's that's everything.
Mm-hmm. And we use Campfire.
Right.
So you're in Campfire most of the time. You're doing that in your web browser?
Yeah. I'd say a lot of the apps I run are either web browser or command line apps. For the command line, I run a ton of apps. I do have a screen session on a remote server, and from there I use Mutt for email,
Mm-hmm.
and I have like an IRC server going on there, and a whole setup
Right.
there, and that's FreeBSD.
You use that for your personal email?
That's
So
right.
What do you use for your work email?
For my work email, I use Mutt, and I use offline IMAP to download the messages and store them locally.
Okay. So you don't use the Gmail web interface?
That's right. Yeah.
For people, who don't know what Mutt is, can you show that?
Yes, I believe I can. Oh, this is my personal email.
Well, you said because it's not. Sorry.
Right. No. Let's get this open here.
Close enough.
Hopefully, I don't have anything awesome. Okay. Yeah. So this is just like.
Right.
And so this is Mutt, and it's just really boring emails, and we can read some Swedish email going on here. And that's for the Geek Meet Stockholm. And then for composing an email, it uses my editor, which in this case is gvim. So it pops up gvim, and I can type, to Chad let's see if I have you stored in my contacts. I set up the OmniComplete on GVim to use my Google contacts.
Okay.
So that was pulling it from Google Contacts. I'll send you an email.
Okay. So you're using Vim
Mhm.
to compose an email,
Right.
which for those of us who use Vim would be really cool to have the same key bindings and all that stuff.
Exactly. So yeah, so I basically have to know 3 programs.
Mm-hmm.
And then save this.
If you used Emacs, you'd only need to know 1.
Yes, this is true. And then I can send that email. And that's that.
Cool.
Yeah, it's pretty simple.
So for those of us who don't do this, like I said, I used Linux
Mm-hmm.
a while ago, and when I switched to a Mac, it was long enough ago where it was like, the way I even said this at the time, it was everything I loved about Linux, but I didn't have to do anything to make it work.
Right.
It sounds like, to a certain extent, Linux, especially, and maybe not even the distros you're using, but there are other distros out there that are even more so,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where if you're just interested in getting work done and not screwing around with a bunch of stuff, you can
Right.
do that.
Yes. Yeah.
So do you think that using Linux and working the way that you do makes you a better developer?
Yes. I believe a lot of my workflow makes me a better developer in that I have the source code to everything available. And so like a part of being a good developer is a curiosity of how things are working, how you have to read source code to learn better stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I have more than just Ruby available. I have the underlying operating system, the underlying kernel. And I've found that really useful. I've actually been working on a Unix operating system
Mm-hmm.
rewritten in Haskell.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been using like the Linux kernel and the FreeBSD kernel as great teaching tools there. So things like that make me a better developer.
And does it make you happier?
Yes. But at this point, it's hard to know whether it makes me happier because of anything besides the fact that I already know it.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely, so like the thing I was showing earlier of like interacting, doing a web inspector on my GUI,
Mm-hmm.
that makes me really happy.
Right. Right, and that's neat. And I think a lot of developers can appreciate
Yeah.
how cool that would be.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
So.
Do you, what if someone's interested in giving this a try,
Mm-hmm.
what's the best way that they might get started?
No, that's a fair question. So there still exists laptops out there that you can't just take Ubuntu and throw it on.
Mm-hmm.
So you do run that risk still. But if you can get your hands on an Ubuntu disk, that's definitely the simplest. They work really hard at making it the simplest distro.
Right.
If you can get your hands on that and install it,
Mm-hmm.
give it a try. Give it an honest effort.
Right.
That's what it comes down to.
And you could even try that out in
In a VM.
in a VM like VMware,
Mhm.
or it's Fusion for Mac, or
Mhm.
Parallels for Mac. If you're on a Mac, Windows it's just called VMware, I think.
Right.
And
Yeah.
run it in there, and it should work, right?
Yeah. Yep. It actually works very well under various VMs. Or even if you're interested in just seeing, in learning more about the terminal and that kind of stuff, you have a server somewhere,
Right.
and feel free to shell into that and poke around,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a lot of what I do is from the terminal, and this nice GUI is nice, but the terminal is where it is.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
think that everyone will be excited and really interested in what you've shown us today, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.